Chapter 7 Part 1 of How I Found Livingstone. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. How I Found Livingstone. Travels, Adventures, and Discoveries in Central Africa, including 4 months' residence with Dr. Livingstone. By Sir Henry M. Stanley. Chapter 7 Part 1 Marenga, Makali, Ugogo, and Uyanzi to Unyanyembe. The 22nd of May saw Thani and Hamad's caravans united with my own at Chunyo, 3½ hours' march from Mpwapwa. The road from the latter place ran along the skirts of the Mpwapwa range. At 3 or 4 places it crossed outlying spurs that stood isolated from the main body of the range. The last of these hill spurs, joined by an elevated cross ridge to the Mpwapwa, shelters the tomb of Chunyo, situated on the western face from the stormy gusts that come roaring down the steep slopes. The water of Chunyo is eminently bad. In fact, it is its saline nitrous nature which has given the name Marenga Makali, bitter water, to the wilderness which separates Usagara from Ugogo. Though extremely offensive to the palate, Arabs and the natives drink it without fear, and without any bad results, but they are careful to withhold their baggage animals from the pits. Being ignorant of its nature, and not exactly understanding what precise location was meant by Marenga Makali, I permitted the donkeys to be taken to water, as usual after a march, and the consequence was calamitous in the extreme. What the fearful swamp of Makata had spared, the waters of Marenga Makali destroyed. In less than 5 days after our departure from Chunyo or Marenga Mali, 5 out of the 9 donkeys left to me at the time, the 5 healthiest animals, fell victim. We formed quite an imposing caravan as we emerged from inhospitable Chunyo, in number amounting to about 400 souls. We were strong in guns, flags, horns, sounding drums, and noise. To Sheikh Hamed, by permission of Sheikh Thani, and myself was allotted the task of guiding and leading this great caravan through dreaded Ugogo, which was a most unhappy selection, as will be seen hereafter. Marenga Mali, over 30 miles across, was at last before us. This distance had to be traversed within 36 hours, so that the fatigue of the ordinary march would be more than doubled by this. From Chunyo to Ugogo not one drop of water was to be found. As a large caravan, say over 200 souls, seldom travels over 1 3/4 miles per hour, a march of 30 miles would require 17 hours of endurance, without water, and but little rest. East Africa generally possessing unlimited quantities of water, caravans have not been compelled, for lack of the element, to have recourse to the mushok of India and the kurba of Egypt. Being able to cross the waterless districts by a couple of long marches, they content themselves for the time with a small gourdful, and with keeping their imaginations dwelling upon the copious quantities they will drink upon arrival at the watering place. The march through this waterless district was most monotonous, and a dangerous fever attacked me, which seemed to eat into my very vitals. The wonders of Africa that bodied themselves forth in the shape of flocks of zebras, giraffes, elands, or antelopes, galloping over the jungleless plain, had no charm for me, nor could they serve to draw my attention from the severe fit of sickness which possessed me. Towards the end of the first march I was not able to sit upon the donkey's back, nor would it do, when but a third of the way across the wilderness, to halt until the next day. Soldiers were therefore detailed to carry me in a hammock, and when the terekeza was performed in the afternoon, I lay in a lethargic state, unconscious of all things. With the night passed the fever, and at 3 o'clock in the morning, when the march was resumed, I was booted and spurred, and the recognized Matangi of my caravan once more. At 8 a.m. we had performed the 32 miles. The wilderness of Marenga Makali had passed and we entered Ugogo, which was at once a dreaded land to my caravan, and a land of promise to myself. The transition from the wilderness into this promised land was very gradual and easy. Very slowly the jungle thinned, the cleared land was a long time appearing, and when it had finally appeared, there were no signs of cultivation until we could clearly make out the herbage and vegetation on some hill slopes to our right, running parallel with our route. Then we saw timber on the hills, and broad acreage under cultivation, and lo, as we ascended a wave of reddish earth covered with tall weeds and cane, but a few feet from us, and directly across our path, were the fields of matama and grain we had been looking for, and Ugogo had been entered an hour before. The view was not such as I expected. I had imagined a plateau several hundred feet higher than Marenga Mkali, and an expansive view which should reveal Ugogo and its characteristics at once. But instead, while travelling from the tall weeds which covered the clearing which had preceded the cultivated parts, we had entered into the depths of the taller matama stalks, and, excepting some distant hills near Mvumi, where the great Sultan lived, the first of the tribe to whom we should pay tribute, the view was extremely limited. However, in the neighbourhood of the first village a glimpse at some of the peculiar features of Ugogo was obtained, and there was a vast plain, now flat, now heaving upwards, here level as a table, there tilted up into rugged knolls bristling with scores of rough boulders of immense size, which lay piled one above another, as if the children of a Titanic race had been playing at house building. Indeed, these piles of rounded, angular, and riven rock formed miniature hills of themselves, and appeared as if each body had been ejected upwards by some violent agency beneath. There was one of these in particular, near Mvumi, which was so large, and being slightly obscured from view by the outspreading branches of a gigantic baobab, bore such a strong resemblance to a square tower of massive dimensions, that for a long time I cherished the idea that I had discovered something most interesting, which had strangely escaped the notice of my predecessors in East Africa. A nearer view dispelled the illusion, and it proved out to be a huge cube of rock, measuring about 40 feet each way. The baobabs were also particularly conspicuous on this scene, no other kind of tree being visible in the cultivated parts. These had probably been left for two reasons: first, want of proper axes for felling trees of such enormous growth; secondly, because during a famine the fruit of the baobab furnishes a flour which, in the absence of anything better, is said to be eatable and nourishing. The first words I heard in Ugogo were from a Wagogo elder, of sturdy form, who in an indolent way tended the flocks, but showed a marked interest in the stranger clad in white flannels, with a Hawk's patent cork solar topee on his head, a most unusual thing in Ugogo, who came walking past him, and there were Yambo, Musungu, Yambo, Bana, Bana, delivered with a voice loud enough to make itself heard a full mile away. No sooner had the greeting been delivered than the word Musungu seemed to electrify his entire village, and the people of other villages, situated at intervals near the road, noting the excitement that reigned at the first, also participated in the general frenzy which seemed suddenly to have possessed them. I consider my progress from the first village to Mvumi to have been most triumphant, for I was accompanied by a furious mob of men, women, and children, all almost as naked as Mother Earth when the first world dawned upon her in the Garden of Eden, fighting, quarrelling, jostling, staggering against each other for the best view of the white man, the like of whom was now seen for the first time in this part of Ugogo. The cries of admiration, such as "Haile," which broke often in the confused uproar upon my head, were not gratefully accepted, inasmuch as I deemed many of them impertinent. A respectful silence and more reserved behaviour would have won my esteem; but, ye powers, who cause etiquette to be observed in Usungu, respectful silence, reserved behaviour, and esteem are terms unknown in savage Ugogo. Hitherto I had compared myself to a merchant of Bagdad travelling among the Kurds of Kurdistan, selling his wares of Damascus silk, keffiyehs, etc. But now I was compelled to lower my standard, and thought myself not much better than a monkey in a zoological collection. One of my soldiers requested them to lessen their vociferous noise, but the evil-minded race ordered him to shut up, as a thing unworthy to speak to the Wagogo. When I imploringly turned to the Arabs for counsel in the strait, old Sheikh Thani, always worldly wise, said, "Heed them not, they are dogs who bite besides barking." At 9 a.m. we were in our boma, near the Mvumi village, but here also crowds of Wagogo came to catch a glimpse of the Musungu, whose presence was soon made known throughout the district of Mvumi. But 2 hours later I was oblivious of their endeavours to see me, for, despite repeated doses of quinine, the Mukunguru had sure hold of me. The next day was a march of 8 miles, from East Mvumi to West Mvumi, where lived the Sultan of the district. The quantity and variety of provisions which